Now let's talk about how the best students structure their days. There's a really nice paper that surveyed close to 700 students. These were medical students, approximately equal number of male and female students, and analyzed the most useful learning habit. That is, the learning habits associated with the most successful student. And so what we know, based on this study, is that there are at least 10 study habits that the highly effective students use. I'm going to focus on the top 5 or 6, just for sake of time. First of all, they set aside time to study. They literally schedule time to study. Now, this probably serves several roles. The first one is that they are able to clear out other distractions. And in fact, that's the second thing that they do. They are very effective, where they make it a point of putting their phone away and off, of isolating themselves. That's right. They're not studying with other people. They study alone. Which is not to say that people who study with others cannot be effective in their studying, but the best performing students seem to study alone. They put their phone away. They tell their friends and families that they are not going to be able to be reached during that time. And yes, they study for 3 or 4 hours per day, but they break that up into a couple of different sessions, typically 2 or 3 sessions. So they're not doing a 3 or 4 hour studying bout all in one shot. So they're managing their time, they're eliminating distractions, and they're studying for a consistent amount of time, at least 5 days per week, okay? The other thing that they do, and this is very important, is that they make an effort to then teach their peers, to teach other students in the class. Now, some of you may be thinking, and I'm thinking back to college here, mostly, that if you spend all this time learning the information and you are in a competitive scenario with the other students, that teaching them the information is kind of a freebie for them and is harder for you, meaning you're putting yourself at a competitive disadvantage, or you're giving them an unfair advantage for not having done the work. It's very clear that students who make it a point to learn material in isolation, then bring that material to other students in the same course and teach them, perform exceedingly well in comparison to the other students. So don't be afraid to be a teacher of your peers in order to test, this is key, to test and develop mastery of the material. So going back to this idea that the best students set aside time, they designate time to study alone without distractions, that is sure to help them anchor their focus and attention. They know that they're going to need to use their focus and attention during that time. And we know with absolute certainty that focus and attention are a limited but renewable resource in the human brain. The longer you're awake, the more is the buildup of a molecule called adenosine in your brain and body. It makes you sleepy, makes it harder to focus. When you sleep, adenosine levels are pushed down again. You're able to focus again. You feel more alert. You can think of adenosine as limiting your attentional budget, which is not to say that some people don't study best in the afternoon or in the evening or even late at night, right? I recall times during university when I'd study between the hours of 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. I don't do that any longer, but scheduling time where you know you're going to need to be focused and attending is perhaps one of the most important things toward being able to focus and attend to the material. Now, if you're taking courses, you probably are going to be a slave to the timing of the course. However, to the extent that you have any control over the time in which you're going to study, keeping that at a regular time or times, perhaps 1 block early in the day, 1 block later in the day, perhaps 2 blocks early in the day, and so on, is going to be beneficial. It turns out that's also supported by the research literature, that the brain, just like with its sleep-wake cycles that entrain to a regular schedule, that is, your brain and body get used to being active and inactive at particular times based on your exposure to sunlight, your exposure to activities, your social rhythms, etc. If you regularly, meaning for the course of about 3 days, make it a point to focus and study at particular times, again, pulling your attention back, it's not an automatic process, but pulling your attention back to a specific location, perhaps on a page or that you're listening to in a lecture, your body and brain will start to entrain to that rhythm such that you will be able to focus and attend better simply by virtue of the regularity of the timing of the exposure to the material. Okay, so you probably need about 2 or 3 days to break into a regular schedule of focusing and attending and studying at a given time or times. Allow yourself that transition period, but then make it a point to schedule those times to study and then try and stick to them as regularly as possible, perhaps even on the weekends if you're approaching the end of the quarter or semester. Keeping those regular times will entrain your nervous system to study and learn at its best at those particular times. There's one other point that I want to pass along from this, and that is when one examined, or these people were asked about their motivation for studying, the best performing students had an interesting answer. They had a very long-term understanding of how, or belief rather, about how their success in medical school would impact their family, how it would impact their life arc, how it would change them. And they weren't particular about the ways in which it would change them or their family. In fact, it was a rather broad, abstract, aspirational way of thinking about their study efforts. So the high-level aspirational stuff within you, whatever that is for you, it's going to be highly individual, is certainly important, and it offers a bookend to the nuts and boltsy kind of stuff that you're going to do, I would hope, in order to best study and learn the specific material, so the specific actions that you're going to take each day to learn specific bits of information that will pull you toward those important aspirations. And now again, if you love the material you're learning, this aspirational component is probably not as important, right? I can recall during university and graduate school thinking, oh my goodness, this is like the coolest thing I've ever heard. I'd probably say that about a million different topics. But of course, sometimes I would take a course where the material was, I don't know if it was more challenging or not, but I had a harder time getting engaged by the material. So the ability to attach to some aspirational goal to pull you through can be very valuable. You're not going to love every topic you have to learn. However, I will say that, at least in my experience, some of the courses that I look back on most fondly are the courses that I struggled with the most. And in fact, that's the basis of the next and easily one of the most important studying tools. So a key theme in all of the excellent literature, that is the peer-reviewed research on how best to study, is that studying that feels challenging is the most effective. I know nobody wants to hear this. Everyone wants to hear about flow, about information just sinking into their brain by osmosis. I think it was a Garfield cartoon where he talked about learning by osmosis. But guess what? That doesn't work. Right now, we know that effort is the cornerstone of learning. So I know there are probably some groans about that. I know some of you perhaps were hoping that today I was going to tell you how to study so that studying wasn't painful. I think I can accomplish that by the end of today's episode. But in order to do that, let's take another quiz. Can you name or list off in your mind 3 tools that the most effective students have been shown to use? I can think of limiting distraction by virtue of putting away phones and telling others you won't be in contact with them. 2, and I'm getting these out of order, I realize, is to isolate, to study alone. And the 3rd that I can recall is to teach others in the same course, okay? You can probably think of a few others. Now, why are we taking these silly little quizzes? Well, turns out they're not so silly when one considers that hopefully you'll remember the information from today so that you don't have to listen to it over and over again. But that if ever there was a strongly research-supported tool in the peer-reviewed literature about how students can learn information better, it's testing. And I know, we think of tests as a way to evaluate our knowledge, but it turns out that testing is one of the best ways to build our knowledge, to retain our knowledge, and again, to offset forgetting.